He laughed under the fireworks while they lowered his father into the ground. A year later, he came back to me, not to apologize, but to ask for my house. My voice trembles as I tell you this, but it steadies with cold resolve because I learned something that day about the difference between a son and a stranger. Before I continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe if you've ever been forced to choose dignity over family. Because what I'm about to tell you will shake you to your core. He thought I was weak. He didn't know I had already prepared his inheritance, and it wasn't what he imagined. The coastal cemetery sits perched on cliffs where the Pacific meets the sky, and on that October evening, the gulls cried like mourners while the wind carried salt and sorrow through the cypress trees. In the distance, laughter echoed from the beach bars below, cruel and bright against the darkness gathering around my husband's grave. I stood there in my black dress, my silver hair whipping against my face, watching them lower the mahogany casket into the earth. 43 years of marriage, and I was burying the only man who ever understood my heart. The empty chair beside me should have held my son. Instead, it held only the weight of his absence, a void so profound it seemed to mock every prayer I'd whispered for his safe return from whatever distant shore had claimed his attention that day. My husband had been proud of that boy once. He has the ocean in his blood, Jonathan used to say, watching our son sail out into the bay. But standing there at the graveside, I realized the ocean had taken more than I'd bargained for. It had washed away his sense of duty, his respect, his love. The minister's words faded into the wind as I stared at that empty chair, feeling the last threads of motherhood unraveling in my chest. This was the moment I should have felt my son's hand in mine, should have shared the weight of grief with the only other person who loved Jonathan as deeply as I did. Instead, I felt utterly alone, abandoned by the child I'd carried, nursed, and raised to be better than this. That's when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up like a cruel star against the gathering dusk, and there was my son's face, tanned, grinning, holding a champagne glass high against a backdrop of string lights and celebration. The video message played automatically, his voice bright with alcohol and joy. "Mom, it's Dad's wish that I live my life, right? We'll do a toast for him at the beach bar. He'd want us to celebrate, not mourn." I stared at that glowing screen, watching my son raise his glass to the camera while his father's body settled into the grave beside me. The contrast was so jarring, so obscene, that I felt something break inside my chest, not my heart, because that had been breaking slowly for months as I watched Jonathan fade away. No, this was something harder, something that had kept me soft and forgiving all these years. This was my faith in unconditional love. I didn't reply to the video. Instead, I reached over and placed the phone face down on Jonathan's casket, the screen still glowing beneath the polished wood. Let him toast the dead while I buried the living memory of the son I thought I knew. The phone went dark, and with it, the last flicker of hope that my boy might still exist somewhere beneath the stranger who had stolen his name. The funeral ended, and people filed past me with their condolences and casseroles, but I barely heard them. All I could think about was that phone, lying silent on the wood, and how perfectly it symbolized everything my son had become: present but not present, close but unreachable, family but not family. I drove home alone to our seaside house, the one Jonathan had bought for us 30 years ago when his maritime consulting business finally took off. Every room held his presence like a shrine, the compass on the mantel that guided him through 20 years at sea, the nautical charts covering the study walls where he'd plot courses for cargo ships crossing the Pacific, the model vessels he built with such careful precision that you could almost hear the ocean calling from their tiny decks. Walking through those rooms that night, I felt the silence amplify every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wine through the eaves. This house had been built for love, filled with laughter, warmed by the presence of a man who understood that home wasn't just walls and windows. It was the sanctuary where two hearts could anchor themselves against life's storms. Now it felt like a museum of memories, beautiful but hollow, precious but fragile. I stood in Jonathan's study, running my fingers along the spines of his maritime law books, his navigation manuals, his collection of Hemingway novels that he'd read aloud to me during our early years together. He thinks this house is just walls and value, I whispered to the empty room. He's wrong. It's my memory of love, and he'll never own it. But I didn't know then how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how much fight I still had left in these old bones. A year passed. A year of silence from my son, a year of learning to live with the ghost of the man I'd loved and the absence of the child I'd lost. I tended Jonathan's rose garden, maintained his boat moored in the harbor, kept his study exactly as he'd left it, right down to the half-finished crossword puzzle on his desk. I was learning to be alone without being lonely, to find peace in the rhythms of wind and tide that had always governed our lives. Then, on a brilliant Tuesday morning in October, exactly 1 year and 3 days after the funeral, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find my son standing on the porch, confident, tanned, wearing an expensive suit that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 6 months. His hair was professionally styled, his smile was practiced, and his eyes held that predatory gleam I'd seen in Jonathan's business rivals but never expected to see in my own child. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood a woman I'd never met, blonde, polished, wearing designer clothes and the kind of smile that never reached the eyes. A few steps behind them both lurked a thin man in a cheap suit, clutching a briefcase like a lifeline. The real estate agent, I realized with a chill that ran straight to my bones. "Hello, Mother," my son said, stepping into my home without invitation. "You look well. Retirement suits you." His tone was warm, but there was something underneath it, something calculating that made my skin crawl. This wasn't the voice of a child coming home to comfort his grieving mother. This was the voice of a businessman arriving to close a deal. They settled themselves in my living room, his wife perching on the edge of the sofa like she might catch something, the agent spreading papers across my coffee table with practiced efficiency. My son leaned back in Jonathan's favorite chair, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. "Mom," he began, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd heard him use with restaurant servers and hotel clerks, "we've been thinking about your situation. This house is far too big for one person, and maintaining a property this size at your age, well, it's not practical. You shouldn't have to worry about repairs and upkeep and all the stress that comes with homeownership." His wife nodded sympathetically, adding in a voice like poisoned honey, "We found you the most wonderful retirement community. Ocean views, a full activities program, medical staff on site 24 hours a day. You'll love it there, and you'll have so many new friends your own age." The real estate agent slid a folder across the table toward me. "Mrs. Chen, your son has asked me to prepare all the necessary documents for a smooth transition. Property transfer agreements, power of attorney forms, financial management contracts, everything you need to ensure your security and his ability to handle your affairs properly." I stared down at those papers, my hands steady but my heart racing. Property transfer agreements. Power of attorney. Financial management. The language was clinical, sanitized, but what they were really asking for was everything. My home, my independence, my right to make decisions about my own life. They wanted me to sign away 40 years of marriage, 30 years of memories, and whatever dignity I had left, all wrapped up in legal jargon and presented as concern for my welfare. "Did you bring these to the burial too?" I asked softly. The room went silent. My son's confident smile flickered for just a moment, and his wife shifted uncomfortably in her seat. The real estate agent cleared his throat and shuffled through his papers, suddenly very interested in something that required his immediate attention. "Mom," my son said finally, his voice taking on that edge of impatience he'd inherited from his father but never learned to control like Jonathan had. "This isn't about the past. This is about your future. About making sure you're taken care of." I nodded slowly, still staring at the papers. "Of course. How thoughtful of you to think of my future. Tell me, did you think about it much during the past year? Did you think about me sitting in this house alone while you where were you, exactly? Celebrating life?" His jaw tightened. I grieved in my own way. Yes, I said, my voice gaining strength. I saw your grief. It was very colorful. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I could feel their frustration building, their carefully rehearsed plan meeting unexpected resistance from the frail old woman who was supposed to be grateful for their intervention. But I wasn't frail, and I wasn't grateful. I was angry, an anger that had been building for a year, fed by loneliness and watered by betrayal, growing into something harder and sharper than they could have imagined. I need some time to think about this, I said finally, closing the folder without looking at its contents. This is a big decision. Surely you understand that. Of course, my son said quickly, sensing an opportunity. Take all the time you need. But Mom, don't overthink it. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that feel scary at first but turn out to be exactly what we needed. After they left, I sat in my quiet house and felt the rage building in my chest like a storm system forming over warm water. They thought I was weak. They thought grief had made me compliant, that age had made me foolish, that loneliness had made me desperate. They were wrong on all counts. I called Mr. Liu, Jonathan's old maritime lawyer, a man who'd helped us navigate the legal complexities of international shipping for 2 decades. His voice was warm with genuine sympathy when I explained what had happened. Sarah, he said, using the name only Jonathan and his closest friends ever used, I think you should bring those papers to my office. Don't sign anything until I've had a chance to review every clause, every subclause, every piece of fine print they've buried in there. The next morning, I sat in Mr. Liu's office while he dissected the documents my son had brought. His face grew darker with each page he turned, and by the time he finished, his expression was grim. Sarah, if you sign these papers, your son won't just have power of attorney, he'll have complete control over all your assets. The property transfer isn't to a retirement community, it's directly to him. And this financial management contract gives him the right to liquidate everything you own without your consent. If you sign these documents, he'll own everything you have by sunrise, and you'll own nothing but a small room in a facility that he controls. I stared at him, feeling the betrayal cut deeper than I'd thought possible. Are you saying he's trying to steal my house? I'm saying he's trying to steal your life. And he's using your grief and your love for him as weapons against you. I drove home along the coastal highway, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The Pacific stretched out beside me, endless and gray under the overcast sky, and I found myself thinking about justice. Not revenge. Revenge was what you sought when you wanted to hurt someone. Justice was what you pursued when you wanted to restore balance, to ensure that actions had consequences, to protect the innocent from those who would exploit their trust. Then let's make sure he never does, I whispered to the empty car, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. That evening, I began searching through Jonathan's things with new purpose. His desk drawers, his filing cabinets, his small safe hidden behind the maritime charts. I went through everything with the methodical thoroughness he'd taught me during our early years together when I'd helped him organize his business papers. In the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath a stack of old navigation charts, I found something that made my blood run cold. Bank statements. Withdrawal slips. ATM receipts. All showing the same pattern, $4,000 withdrawn in cash, every month for the past year and a half. The date started 3 months after Jonathan's cancer diagnosis and continued right up until the week he died. At first, my mind raced with innocent explanations. Maybe Jonathan had been planning surprises for me, saving cash for gifts he never got to give. Maybe he'd been preparing for expenses the insurance wouldn't cover. Maybe he'd been thinking ahead to funeral costs or medical bills. But as I studied the patterns, the timing, the amounts, a horrible realization began to dawn. Jonathan had never been secretive about money. In 43 years of marriage, we'd shared every financial decision, discussed every major purchase, planned every investment together. He would never have withdrawn this much cash without telling me, unless he hadn't been the one withdrawing it. My son had a key to our house. He'd had access to our accounts since Jonathan got sick and needed help managing his affairs. I'd given him that access myself, trusting him to help his father during those difficult last months when the chemotherapy left Jonathan too weak to handle the banking himself. The betrayal was so complete, so breathtaking in its scope, that I had to sit down before my legs gave out beneath me. He didn't just skip his father's funeral, I whispered to the empty room. He financed his own party with a dying man's savings. My hands shook as I added up the totals. 18 months of theft. $72,000, stolen $4,000 at a time while his father fought for his life and I fought to keep our family together. No wonder my son had looked so prosperous, so confident, so well-dressed. He'd been living off his father's illness, profiting from our pain, building his new life on the foundation of our family's destruction. The rage that filled me then was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was pure and clean and righteous, burning away the last vestiges of maternal love and leaving only the demand for justice. My son hadn't just betrayed me, he'd betrayed the dying man who'd trusted him, stolen from the father who'd sacrificed everything to give him opportunities, violated the sacred bond between parent and child that I'd thought was unbreakable. I needed confirmation, needed to be absolutely certain before I acted. The next morning, I visited Mrs. Patterson, the hospice nurse who'd cared for Jonathan during his final months. She was a kind woman, gentle but strong, who'd seen too much human suffering to be shocked by anything, but when I showed her the bank records, tears sprang to her eyes. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I wondered about those conversations. Your son would come by when you were at the grocery store or running errands, and he'd talk to your husband about needing money for treatments that insurance wouldn't cover. Experimental therapies," he said. "Alternative medicine. Your husband was so desperate to live, so afraid of leaving you alone, he believed everything." The picture was complete now, painted in strokes of cruelty so deliberate they took my breath away. My son had used his father's love as a weapon against him, exploited Jonathan's desperate hope for recovery, convinced a dying man to fund his killer's lifestyle by pretending the money would buy more time. It was manipulation so calculated, so coldly efficient, that I barely recognized the child I'd raised in the monster he'd become. "He fooled the man who gave him everything," I said, my voice steady now with purpose. Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What are you going to do?" I looked out her kitchen window at the ocean beyond, watching the waves build and crash in their eternal rhythm. "I buried one man that day," I said quietly. "But the other buried himself. I knew what I had to do, but I needed to be smart about it." My son thought he was dealing with a grieving widow, overwhelmed by loss and grateful for his intervention. I could use that assumption against him. I could play the part he expected while I prepared the justice he'd earned. I called him that evening, making my voice shake with just the right amount of uncertainty and age. "Darling, I've been thinking about what you said. Maybe you're right. This house does feel too empty, and I'm not getting any younger. The maintenance, the loneliness, it's all becoming too much." I could hear the excitement in his voice, barely contained. "Mom, I'm so glad you're being practical about this. It really is the best thing for everyone. Come by tomorrow afternoon," I said, letting a tremor creep into my words. "Let's sit down together and go through everything properly. I want to understand all the details before I make such a big decision." "Of course. We'll bring all the papers, and I'll explain everything step by step. You don't need to worry about a thing." He took the bait completely, hearing only what he wanted to hear, an old woman finally surrendering to his superior judgment. If you've ever pretended to be weak just to teach someone strength, you understand the power of appearing defeated when you're actually planning victory. The next morning, I returned to Mr. Liu's office with a clear mission. "I want to create a foundation," I told him. "The Jonathan Chin Foundation for Maritime Education. I want to donate our house and property to provide scholarships for young people studying marine sciences, naval architecture, ocean conservation, all the things my husband believed in. Mr. Liu smiled, understanding immediately. A charitable foundation with the property held in perpetual trust. Very difficult to challenge legally, and impossible to reverse once properly executed. I want to sign the papers today, I said. With the same pen Jonathan and I used to sign our marriage certificate. For the next several hours, we worked through the legal details. The foundation would be managed by a board of trustees including Mr. Liu, Dr. Martinez from the Marine Biology Department at the local university, and Captain Rodriguez, Jonathan's oldest friend from his naval days. The house would be converted into a research station and dormitory for scholarship recipients. Jonathan's name would be carved in stone above the entrance, ensuring that his legacy of education and mentorship would continue long after both of us were gone. When I signed the final document, my hand was steady and my heart was light. He will come tomorrow for a house that no longer exists in his name, I told Mr. Liu. And what will you tell him? I looked out his office window at the harbor where Jonathan's boat still bobbed at its mooring. I'll tell him the truth. Finally. The meeting was set for 2 o'clock the next day, in the conference room of my son's business partner's firm. Modern and cold, all glass walls and artificial smiles, the kind of place where deals were made and lives were traded like commodities. I arrived precisely on time, wearing my best navy blue dress and the pearl necklace Jonathan had given me for our 20th anniversary. My son was there with his wife and the real estate agent, along with 2 other men in expensive suits who introduced themselves as his business partners. Everyone was smiling, congratulating me on making such a wise decision, treating me like a child who'd finally agreed to take her medicine. I'm so proud of you, Mom, my son said, guiding me to a chair at the head of the polished conference table. This is going to be wonderful for all of us. I played my part perfectly, gentle, slightly confused, sipping the tea they'd thoughtfully provided while they spread papers across the table and explained how generous they were being with the terms of my dispossession. They were so confident, so certain of their victory, that none of them noticed when I placed 2 envelopes on the table beside my teacup. One was blue, the color of the ocean Jonathan had loved. The other was brown, the color of earth, of burial, of secrets dragged into the light. Before you toast to your new beginning, I said quietly, my voice cutting through their cheerful chatter like a blade through silk, let's go over what you did to your father's end. The room went silent. My son's smile faltered, and his wife's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. The business partners looked confused, glancing between us as the atmosphere shifted from celebration to something darker. I opened the brown envelope first, spreading out the bank statements, the withdrawal slips, the ATM receipts in chronological order across the gleaming table. 18 months, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. $72,000. $4,000 every month, taken from a dying man's account while I sat beside his bed and watched him fade away. My son's face went white. Mom, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. I looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time in years, he couldn't hold my gaze. You told him it was for experimental treatments. You convinced a desperate man that his money could buy him more time with his wife. You used his love for me as leverage to fund your lifestyle while he died in agony, believing he was investing in hope. The business partners were staring now, their smiles completely gone. One of them, a silver-haired man in a suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, leaned back in his chair with obvious distaste. Is this true? It's complicated, my son stammered. There were expenses, legitimate expenses. $72,000 in cash withdrawals, I continued relentlessly. No receipts. No medical bills. No treatment centers. Just cash, disappearing into your accounts while your father's savings evaporated and his hope turned to despair. I opened the blue envelope and pulled out the foundation documents, placing them carefully beside the bank records. The Jonathan Chen Foundation for Maritime Education. Established yesterday with the full donation of our family property. The house you came here to steal no longer belongs to me, it belongs to the students who will study there, the young people who will learn about the ocean your father loved, the future he believed in even when his own was ending. The room erupted in shocked murmurs and hastily whispered conversations. The real estate agent gathered his papers with shaking hands. My son's wife stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor as she backed toward the door. The ocean will carry his name longer than greed ever could, I said, standing slowly and smoothing my dress. Every student who walks through those doors will learn about integrity, about honor, about the kind of man who spent his life building others up instead of tearing them down. One of the business partners, the silver-haired one, cleared his throat. Mrs. Chen, are you saying that your son misappropriated funds from his dying father? I'm saying that actions have consequences, I replied calmly. And that sometimes the truth comes to light exactly when it needs to. I pulled one final document from the blue envelope, a formal demand for restitution that Mr. Liu had prepared. $72,000, plus interest, to be repaid to the Jonathan Chin Foundation within 90 days. If you sign this confession and agree to the payment schedule, you keep your freedom and your reputation. If you don't. I didn't need to finish the sentence. The threat of criminal charges, of public exposure, of professional ruin hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. The silver-haired partner stood and began gathering his briefcase. I think our business here is concluded, he said coldly. We don't associate with individuals who steal from family members. The other partners followed suit, filing out of the conference room with barely concealed disgust. The real estate agent practically fled, leaving his papers scattered across the table in his haste to escape. Within minutes, only my son, his wife, and I remained in the glass-walled room. Mom, my son said, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Please. I can explain everything. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in years. Beneath the expensive clothes and professional styling, I could see the child he'd once been, the boy who'd built sandcastles with his father and helped me plant roses in the garden. But I could also see the man he'd chosen to become, and the two were irreconcilable. You're right, I said softly. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. You were supposed to hold my hand at your father's funeral. You were supposed to grieve with me, to help me carry the weight of 43 years of love and loss. You were supposed to be my son. His wife tugged at his arm. David, we need to go. Now. But he couldn't move, couldn't look away from my face. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did, I said with absolute certainty. Every withdrawal was a choice. Every lie was deliberate. Every day you let your father believe he was buying hope while you were stealing his legacy, those were all choices you made consciously, carefully, coldly. I placed the restitution agreement on the table in front of him. Sign it, and this ends here. The foundation gets its money, and you get to keep whatever conscience you have left. Don't sign it, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of son abandons his mother and steals from his dying father. He stared at the paper for a long moment, his hand trembling as he reached for the pen. His signature was barely legible, a scrawl that seemed to diminish him physically as he wrote it. There, he whispered. Are you happy now? I folded the signed agreement and placed it carefully in my purse. I'm not happy. I'm heartbroken. But I'm also free from the obligation to protect someone who never protected anyone but himself, free from the burden of loving unconditionally when that love was being used as a weapon against me. I walked toward the door, then paused and looked back at him one final time. Your father would have forgiven you. Even after everything you did, he would have found a way to love you anyway. I'm not him. I'm just the woman he left behind, and I choose to honor his memory by ensuring it can't be corrupted by greed. I left them there in that cold glass room and walked out into the autumn sunlight. The sea wind caught my silver hair and carried it back from my face, and for the first time since Jonathan's death, I felt truly alive. He came from my house, but I gave him a lesson instead. One he'll remember longer than stone and brick. I didn't ruin him, I only showed him the value of what he had already thrown away. His inheritance was never meant to be money or property or things that could be bought and sold. His inheritance was supposed to be integrity, compassion, loyalty, love, all the treasures his father had tried to give him and he had chosen to reject. Now those gifts belong to strangers who will value them properly. Every student who benefits from the Jonathan Chin Foundation will carry forward the legacy my son abandoned. They'll learn not just about maritime science and ocean conservation, but about the kind of character that builds lasting contributions to the world. I drive past the house sometimes, watching the renovations transform it into something beautiful and purposeful. They've installed laboratories and dormitories, a library, and a conference center. The rose garden has been expanded into a memorial garden where students can study or simply sit quietly by the water. Jonathan's name is carved in granite above the entrance, just as I requested, and below it are the words he lived by. The sea teaches us that there are depths we cannot fathom, currents we cannot control, and storms we cannot avoid, but with proper navigation and steady courage, we can reach any harbor. My son never contacted me again after that day in the conference room. I heard through mutual acquaintances that his business partnership dissolved, that his marriage ended in a bitter divorce, that he eventually moved away to start over somewhere else. I felt no satisfaction in his failures, no vindication in his struggles. I simply felt empty where love used to live, and peaceful where anger used to burn. True inheritance isn't money. It's the values we protect when no one's watching, the principles we uphold when it would be easier to compromise, the love we choose to honor even when it's no longer returned. If you believe that legacy means love, not luxury, then you understand why I had to do what I did. Some betrayals are so complete that forgiveness becomes complicity, and some wounds cut so deep that healing requires the surgical removal of what cannot be saved. I live quietly now in a small apartment overlooking the harbor, close enough to see the foundation that bears Jonathan's name but far enough away to let it grow into something larger than our personal tragedy. Sometimes I sit on my balcony and watch the students coming and going, carrying books and diving equipment and the bright enthusiasm of young people who believe they can change the world. They probably can, with the right guidance and the right values and the right understanding of what it means to be truly wealthy. My son thought he could inherit my life by stealing my choices, but inheritance isn't something you can take, it's something you must earn. The students at the Jonathan Chin Foundation are earning their inheritance every day through study and dedication and respect for the ocean that gives life to everything it touches. They're learning that real treasure lies not in what you can extract from the world, but in what you can contribute to it. That's the lesson I hope resonates with anyone who hears this story. Family isn't defined by blood or obligation or legal documents, it's defined by love, loyalty, and mutual respect. When those foundations crumble, when trust is betrayed and love is weaponized, sometimes the most loving thing you can do is protect the memory of what was good from the corruption of what has become evil. I don't regret my choice. I regret that it became necessary, but I don't regret making it. Justice isn't revenge. It's the restoration of balance, the protection of the innocent, the defense of values that matter more than personal comfort. Sometimes we have to choose between keeping the peace and keeping our principles, and I learned that peace without justice is just another form of surrender. The ocean continues its eternal rhythm outside my window, and I find comfort in its constancy. Tides rise and fall, storms come and go, but the sea endures. Love is like that too. It can be betrayed, abandoned, even murdered, but it never really dies. It just finds new channels, new shores, new ways to nourish the world. Jonathan's love lives on in every student who studies at the foundation, in every breakthrough in marine conservation, in every young person who learns to navigate life with integrity and purpose. My love for the son I lost lives on too, transformed into something harder but more durable, a commitment to truth, a dedication to justice, and an understanding that sometimes the most profound act of love is refusing to enable the destruction of everything you hold dear. That's my story. That's my choice. That's my inheritance to anyone who believes that some things matter more than family harmony, more than keeping the peace, more than protecting people from the consequences of their own actions. Love without accountability isn't love at all, it's just another form of betrayal, dressed up in prettier clothes and softer words. The sea teaches us that there are depths we cannot fathom, currents we cannot control, and storms we cannot avoid, but with proper navigation and steady courage, we can reach any harbor. Even the most difficult ones. Even the ones that require us to leave everything familiar behind and sail toward a horizon we can barely see. I'm sailing toward that horizon now, and for the first time in years, I'm not afraid of what I might find there.